Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Nova Mother podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Nicholas, and I'm beyond just, what's the word? Honored and emotional to introduce you to a dear friend from almost 15, 20 years ago in our lifetime as beer cart girls to a whole new phase of who we are now. I have Darla Farhat on the podcast today. She was born and raised in Niagara Falls, Ontario. Darla hung on to silver linings as a way of life as a little girl. She grew up fast and went on to McMaster University for health science, followed by a career as a behavior support specialist for individuals residing in a home, living with autism, and dual diagnosis for 12 years. She was then accepted into a private paramedic program. Motivationally spoke in elementary schools, troubled youth, and university pre-med students. A creative soul, she writes poetry and wrote wellness articles for a local magazine. Currently, she is relocated to Nova Scotia and works for the Department of Justice, helping victims and their families navigate through the criminal court processes while providing support in court for victims of crime. Recently, she received a promotion and now works in a specialized court for victims of domestic violence. At the age of 40, she met the love of her life, Abe. At age 43, she was pregnant. That was the last thing she thought she would be. But God is the best of planners and the disposer of all affairs. She is a mother, and suddenly every word and credential that came before this seems to pale in comparison now. She is a mother. Welcome, Darla.
Thank you.
I'm emotional calling you a mother. We haven't. Oh, yeah, this is our cackle too. Oh my gosh, so many years of cackling. Oh, I love you. Welcome.
I
You,
love you too.
I can't wait. I am so honored that you are a part of the companion series and that you
I'm
are
honored
going
to
to.
have this.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. For you to have me because I was listening to this leading up to this point. So, yeah.
I'm going to pass the mic. I'm going to pass the divine God spirit led over to you to move through what was a conscious conception and all the things that followed. So take us through it. I love you.
I love you too. Thank you. Well, so I met Abe when I was 40. And when I say that loosely because we went to high school together. And long story short, I was his crush, but I didn't know
Mhm.
it. And we'd cross paths throughout life. Like I'd see him in a store or whatever, and he was just like this playboy. Like my sister, who you remember her, how protective she was. She would like push me by him, like, nope, you're not talking to him, because he was just this playboy, right? Like he was just that guy. And I met someone. It was in a serious relationship before Abe for 10 years, and at that time, we were together for that long, and I just thought that I never wanted kids. I didn't want to be a mother. And I was always envious of people, like my sister, who knew from day one that they wanted to be a mom, because I would play with the idea, and I'm like, no, I don't want to. I don't want kids. I want to work, and I want to travel, and that's it. And things fell through, obviously, brutally with my ex, and he cheated on me the whole time and had an alternate identity. And I found
Mm.
out about that 10 years in. So for some reason, I wanted my floor mats cleaned for my car. And I ended up contacting Abe because that's what he did for a living. He detailed cars. So I couldn't get them clean and he cleaned them. And the rest is history.
Your floor mats.
My floor mats, that's how we
It
met.
would come down to your car, wouldn't it?
Right? Like I had like my floor mats, but they had the salt stains in them and I couldn't get it out. So I remember messaging and being like, hey, can you give me advice? He's like, well, just bring them. I'll do them for you. And then from there, we started like I fell in love with them. The first time we had a conversation after I picked up the floor mats, the third question in is he asked me if I believed in God. That was his third question. And I've never been with a man so deep and just like wanting to get into the nitty-gritty of life immediately. And I was like, well, I remember driving home and being like, I'm in big trouble. Because I didn't want anything at the time because I was recently broken up after a decade, right?
Yeah.
And
And
I
you were
couldn't help
married
it.
too. Like,
Yeah,
well, you were divorced at
I
that
could,
point.
yeah, I couldn't, yeah, it was divorced. So, yeah, crazy. So, anyways, with Abe, we were together. I met his family, and his family, wonderful. He comes from an extremely large family, something I never had. It's just myself and my sister and my parents. He is one of seven siblings, and his mother, and he grew up in Lebanon. He was born and raised in Lebanon, and they're all Muslim. And when I met the family, overwhelmed was like an understatement because they're all so wonderful, but they're all so close, and it was so huge, and they all have their children, and like they're all about family. And I knew that they're Muslim and that his mom was he doesn't bring girls home. He just doesn't.
Mm.
Yeah. And so, he was
Mm.
still single at 42, right? And his mom was always like, when are you going to settle down? And to settle down with me, like, who typically, a white woman, not non-Muslim, wasn't the first choice, I would imagine. But I won them over like I win everybody over.
Of course.
So, yeah. And, yeah.
You have that capability. Absolutely.
Right?
It made you a great beer cart girl.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, it's like, oh my God, it's miles away from now. But
Yeah, you're
yeah, I met
amazing.
his mom and she was just like the ultimate matriarch.
Mm.
She had seven kids and they came from Lebanon and their story is a podcast in and of itself.
Mm.
They had their house blown up when they were nine by Israel, by the war that happened. And they had to go. I just felt compelled to tell a story about her because I was like, that's a mom. Like they told me the story recently where after their house was blown up, Israel actually held them at gunpoint and kicked them out of their home. And so she had to gather up her babies and everything else, and they had no home in Lebanon. And they didn't know what they were going to do. But the dad was like, I need to work. Like, all my stuff's in there. Like, how am I going to provide for this family? And his mom got out her white hijab and walked down to where Israel was and just started waving it. Like I surrender kind of thing. Like, can I come? And they're like holding, guns up to her, being like, what are you doing back here? And she's like, please, can I just gather some of my husband's tools so that he can provide for our family? So they ended up, she's a very convincing woman. So they ended up letting her into the house so that she can grab some clothes and items for her kids and some tools so that they could survive. I get choked up talking about it too.
What is her name? We need to name her.
Her name's Itaf.
Itaf.
Itaf Kareem.
Itaf?
Itaf Kareem.
Itaf Karim.
Yeah.
Yes, she will be a part of this story.
Yeah.
She is still is, yeah.
So they ended up moving to Canada when Abe was nine with nothing, and they stayed at the uncle's place who also fled from the war, and they ended up getting their house blown up. So they stayed here. They couldn't go back. And yeah, so um, anyways, back to Abe and meeting the family. I just loved her immediately, and I loved the whole family immediately. I just fell in love. I fell in love with their culture. I fell in love with their religion. I fell in love, and I just needed to know more. And so as we were dating, and I started going over to the house more and more, Abe and I moved in with each other very quickly for Darla because I was a commitment phobe, as you know. I was like very quickly for Darla. He moved in, and we started planning a life together. I felt I was madly in love with him. Like everything that I was before him, like all the fears, all the commitments, everything just went out the window. So I was like, this is new for me and very terrifying.
Mm.
So from there, we were living and the mom was in love with us. We'd go to the parents every day. We'd sit, we'd break bread, we'd have food. And the mom started falling in love with me too. So she started saying, hey, like, when are you going to do things the halal way, she would say, which halal is a term in the Muslim word that says you have to do things properly. Like, you can't live with the shack up with this girl. You got to marry her and everything else like that, right? So I was like, yeah, mom, just let me be. Like, we're doing things our own way on our own time. And then she started being like, when am I going to see your baby? When am I going to see your baby? And she kept on pushing it and pushing it. And we were just kind of like, okay, we didn't know if we wanted kids. I'm in my 40s too, right? Like at that point, my mentality was like, my eggs are like tumbleweeds. All right. There's nothing there because this is what they tell you, right? When you're in
Yeah,
40, your
this is the
40s, you're not going
narrative.
to get pregnant. I came obviously from a partial medical background, who it was, the possibility of me getting pregnant is like less than 1%. That's the fact. That's the fact that they state. I'm very aware of that because I already learned that. And
That was indoctrinated. And I don't know if this feels okay to bring this in, but there was a point through your maidenhood. Did you call in a child too? I can't recall.
did I, no,
No, you hadn't had a loss. I don't know why I had thought when we had first met for some reason,
no,
when you were working at the golf course, that oh, I thought you had. That's so interesting. For some reason I thought you had a loss or just chosen not to move ahead with baby.
no. I know I didn't want kids, but I don't remember having a miscarriage or anything like that.
Interesting. That's
Yeah.
so weird that I actually thought that. Maybe there was someone else we were working with at the time then.
I had a friend who had that. I'll let her remain nameless, but I did have a friend. So maybe
Okay,
that's
maybe
why.
you were speaking about it when we were first working at the golf
Hmm.
course that chose to
Yeah.
have baby removed and have an
Yeah.
abortion. Yes,
Hmm.
okay. Wow, so for some reason I had thought that had been your journey because you had left that partner too when we were working together at the golf
Oh,
course.
okay. He was
And
another
that was a
nightmare.
big, yeah. So isn't that
It's,
it's so interesting how in your maidenhood, like we were in our 20s or teens, 20s, that you're kind of like hearing those pieces and trying to put it together, but never really connected to our wombs at all.
well, he had a child, so I don't know if that's the confusion. He had a child,
I don't
and I was helping
know.
raise her
Okay,
at the
maybe.
time. So maybe that's why.
Isn't that
And he had,
interesting?
I know I shouldn't share that on here, but there was conversation around that child and what was to be done with that partner before the child came. So maybe that's why.
Okay, maybe. Wow. Isn't that so interesting? So
Yeah.
your womb has not had a child then in it.
No,
No.
never.
Wow.
Yeah,
So this
never.
is
Not
where
even a miscarriage.
you're okay. Okay.
So we had a conversation, him and I said, listen, you know, he's like, we're like, we're not getting any younger. Like, what do you want to do?
Mm,
And he said, yeah, I think I do. Like, I think he's like, in fact, I know I do. Let's do this. And I said, okay, well, this is how I would like things to go. And you can agree or not agree, we can discuss it. But I didn't want the pressure. My life, even to this day, has enough pressure on it in
mm,
of itself. Like I knew that I would crack if I just added that additional pressure to have IVF or to time it, even like the ovulation strips. I
mm.
wanted nothing to do with it. I said, I want this to happen organically because I'm a firm believer if it's meant to be, it'll be, as cliche as that is. I said,
No.
if this happens, then it's meant to be. I said, but your mom, she prays 5 times a day. She's very connected with God. And obviously we were becoming connected with God. Like I became a revert. Like I became Muslim before this even happened. And I started praying 5 times a day. And it was Ramadan at the time when we had this discussion, which Ramadan is for everyone who doesn't know, is like it happens in Islam and when you're Muslim and it happens once a year and you fast all day and you pray and you're not supposed to do anything sinful at all. You're not supposed to as a Muslim anyways, but it's extra strict and it's for a month period. It's so long. Trust me, it's long. And you fast all day, you eat when the sun sets, and you pray. And you go to the mosque and you are extra vigilant about what you allow into your being at the time. And it's really hard
Mm,
because you can't have water. It's not like you can have water throughout the day. Like you can't. So
really?
yeah. And then you break your fast at sunset. And at the end, it's like a celebration. It's called Eid and it's kind of like Christmas. And you celebrate your connection to Allah. You're supposed to read the whole Quran the whole time and everything else like that. So it was during Ramadan. He said, okay, let's do this. And I said, okay, no pressure, organically. And we did. We just stopped being careful, I call it. Like we just stopped being careful and letting things happen. And every month I'd get my period. Every month I'd get my period. We started in um, I think the January of the previous year. And then, they say after 6 months, if you're not pregnant, you should go see a doctor and get yourself checked out and see your ovulation. And these are all things we didn't even have. Like every month I get my period, and I was kind of like, oh, like the disappointment would kick in. Like maybe I can't have children. And I would shove that down because I'm like, no, because that mentality is not going to get you anywhere. And you promised yourself you're not going to put pressure and you just have to trust. So we did, and we did. And then 2023, in January of 2023, so a full year later, after we stopped being careful, um, I had my period, but it was very light. So I'm like, oh, great, I'm perimenopausal. Like these are all the things you know as a woman, right? Because you're educated on it and people are shoving it down your throat at this age, right? Because I was 43, right? And if, again, if you look at the stat, less than 1% chance of getting pregnant, and you're probably going to need help. And even if you do get pregnant, you're going to have all these issues, right? So I was like, okay, so great, I'm perimenopausal, whatever. So then comes February, and I missed it entirely. And I didn't tell Abe because I wasn't like, I'm perimenopausal. My period's really light. I just kind of kept it to myself. And then February missed it. I'm like, okay, well, with perimenopause, my periods are going to start being irregular. So I gave it a couple
Gosh.
weeks. Gave it a couple weeks. And I'm like, that's it. I'm going to go get some tests. So I got pregnancy tests and whatever. And I sat there and I remember sitting there and, going pee and putting it down there and not even thinking, like, okay, it's just going to be, this is it, right? Like, I wasn't even that anxious feeling of what if. I was just in such denial, I think, like, this is impossible. And the possibility of this is so slim. So I looked and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's two red bars. I'm like, no. So I waited and I went pee again. I think I got three tests. And I'm like, oh my God. And I didn't tell Abe. I was in the bathroom and I'm just sitting there and I'm like, okay. And that was January. No, sorry, that was February. And I came out into the bathroom and I'm like, what do I do? And I was kind of like, should I do something grand? Like, should I hide this from him and then get him a gift on Valentine's Day? Because it was around about Valentine's Day, like a little onesie or something. And then I couldn't hold it. So
No.
we went outside. I remember standing out on the deck with him and he was sitting there and he was looking around and talking in the sun and talking. I couldn't. I was so anxious. It was like, I don't know, like if other women get this too. I've never actually had this conversation, but it's this combination of fear, panic, joy, denial, all in one. It's like almost like grief, right? But you're like I was so happy, but I was so scared at the same time.
And only you
Um,
hold the secret in that moment.
yeah,
I mean, a lot
right?
of partners will say, "Oh, I knew you were," or "I could
Yeah,
sense you were," or whatever. I don't
yeah.
know if they did, but yeah, it's
No, he did.
interesting.
Yeah. So then I looked at him and he was talking about something. He's like, hey, babe. He's just talking about something. I'm like, I'm pregnant. He's like, what? And he looked at me like it was like I dropped this bomb on him and he was like in denial too. He's like, what? I'm like, I'm pregnant. And I started bawling. Like I was just like panicked. And I think it's because I had my heart set since high school that I was never having them. And I was still set
Mm.
on that in my 40s. Like that's a long time to hold that
That's a
story for yourself.
long time. You are sitting in your masculine, in that part of you for a long time,
Oh
not
my
letting your
gosh.
womb to open.
Right?
But your son is so magical. He's like, listen, I am breaking down all those walls. And Abe too. And you, I mean, I don't know if you want to speak to this, but you had a very adverse childhood with a lot of
My
trauma as well.
childhood, I'll leave it at this.
Yeah.
Because they're still here. But
Yeah, your
I just don't
parents.
want
Yeah.
to like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
My parents are still here. But I had a very difficult childhood and that caused me to grow up. That's what it was in my bio, way too fast for a
Yeah.
child.
Yeah. You didn't
And
have a
I
childhood.
I became a caregiver very young.
Yeah.
And that set the tone, I think, for obviously for all of us for my whole entire life.
Yeah.
And trust me, I've been to psychotherapy. I went to psychotherapy and it wasn't just about my childhood, but it was about, the things I went through in my relationships and everything else like that. And I did heal what I thought were those wounds, right? But in 6 years, and I just
Oh,
started going to psychotherapy, I think when I was 40. So
it's
I don't,
new. Yeah. There was a lot of sort of other places it was held in your body for sure.
yeah. And it
Yeah.
forced you when you're a child and you go through a traumatic childhood, it really forces you to not rely on anyone and because you have to rely on yourself for safety because you shouldn't have to rely. You should be able to look to your mom and dad for safety at the time. And physically, yes, roof above my head, um,
Food, clothes.
physical, like, but emotional, no, not
Yeah.
there. So, and you just get to the point where they have their own story and you kind of step outside yourself as a daughter
Mhm.
and say, okay, like they never healed their wounds. So I'm
Mhm.
not going to hold that. You have to forgive them. They did the best they could with what they had.
Yeah.
And that's it, right? So
Those inner
Anyways,
child still cry. I mean, I definitely feel it through my mothering journey. It comes up in stages of different parts of neglect or things that get activated. And it's an opportunity to step into
yeah, it's
yourself.
constant.
And it's funny, actually, I was recommended to journal to myself as my children turned 2 and 5 about what I had felt at 2-year-old Victoria and 5-year-old Victoria. And even her suggesting it in sort of my somatic experience was like, whoa, like it'll be very potent. There'll
It
be,
is.
yeah, yeah.
It still is to bring it up and to share the
To
story. Like
think
that's why I
those,
motivationally spoke, right? And then I started realizing the more I'm retelling this story, the more it's coming up to the surface. And um, it's just kind of triggering at that point,
it's
right? And
staying in the
you go away
body
feeling, yeah, and it's feeling drained. So I had to find a way to
to
kind
move
of
it out.
to move it out. And that's why I don't like going over the details so much.
Yeah.
I
How
will
did
if
you move
somebody
it
needs me
out?
to.
How did,
With therapy and stepping outside of myself as a daughter. Like I didn't look at them like a little girl anymore because I was living in that. I was like, how
yeah,
could you do this? Like, how could you not be there for me? How could you, and my sister as well, right? We both stand in that space. And I'm like, I can't carry this because you can't carry that and blame it on who you are.
no,
So,
at some
and
point
yeah, and
you
you
have
can't
to
blame them
move.
because, they have their own cross to bear, as I say, and it's like they know, right?
Yeah,
And
they
full
do.
and it comes around full circle, and I'm still taking care of them in their
Yeah.
advanced age, and that in itself is trauma, right? For me to go through both of them in less than 6 months, like having to revive my dad and like him being taken by ambulance as an adult and everything else like that, like that's all my responsibility. And it's just I never could be a daughter. I said goodbye at being a daughter a long time ago, and which sucks. And it caused me, and I still feel it now, to be very steadfast and I don't need anyone and very alpha, even though I'm a woman. So I have an
Yes.
alpha career. I climb the corporate ladder like it's nothing. Like it doesn't even take effort for me. It's just because that's who I am. So I guess I thank them for that because it's gained me financial stability and
Right.
very strong survival instinct, right? It doesn't take a lot. Like it takes a lot to shake me because my foundation is so strong because
Mhm.
you live in that survival mode.
Yeah, you're living in fight or flight. But I think
Constant.
now you're set, yeah, constant. But I think you learned as now you're pregnant that you have to sometimes lay that down. You have to lay that sword down.
You have to for survival. So isn't that interesting? Like if you
Yes,
don't lay
isn't
it down at
it?
certain points, like if
It
you don't
starts
lay it
coming up in
down,
your pregnancy with some
yes,
signs and symptoms and
yeah,
certain outcomes.
yeah.
Yeah,
And now that I'm like Muslim and I'm a firm believer in Allah, which is God, it's like, no, he's going to teach you a lesson, Darla. Like this is not who you're, and we'll get to that later, but this is not who you, this isn't all you are. You
that's
have to let, and
right.
you know what? And it's so interesting because Abe is such an alpha male. So he, just meeting him, I think that's why I fell for him immediately. I stepped into my feminine a little bit more and I was
Yeah,
scared. And I was very scared with him in the beginning,
because you
right?
could
Because I'm
lean
like,
into
this is
him.
new. And he's very alpha. So there's no way I could walk all over him because I could walk all over people, right? As a female, I'm like, well, whatever, this and that. With him, it's very feminine. Like I cook for him, I clean for him. It's that culture. I do everything. And people are like, oh, the feminists out there are probably going to be mad at me, but I needed that. And and I needed to do that because all day I'm making crazy decisions. I'm standing up in court, with judges and everything else like that. And I'm making really difficult decisions all day long and I'm holding it together. You can't be emotional in court. You have to be stoic. You have to be neutral always, no matter what the story is. And I sit there and I see, videos and children and babies and homicides and domestic violence. And I sit there in those stories all day long. So to come home and be able to cook a rack of lamb and just sit there and serve him is like my dream.
Yeah,
I need that, which is crazy.
it's not. It's so biological.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Well,
very
I'm realizing that
biological.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm almost mad at the person who like fought for our rights to work. I'm like, what's going on now? Like, why? Who
I
did
know
that?
that gets tricky inside of ourselves. It
Right? I'm like, let me
absolutely
be
does.
barefoot and pregnant and at the
Well,
stove
and
and
and it's funny. It's like, how do we claim back our time as a family, both woman and man, right?
yeah,
Together as family, not all separated all day long.
right.
Yeah.
well, that's creates the system, right? The system likes us
I know.
loop. And I know because I work for them. So anyways,
You're
so
pregnant.
yeah,
It's
that's when I'm pregnant.
February.
Yeah, I'm pregnant. It's February. It took him a while to digest it. And then him in his beautiful, masculine, just sweet, strong way, he's looking at me. He's like, why are you crying? I'm like, I don't know, because you know me. I'm like, everything's gonna change now, and I don't know what's happening.
Go into
And
panic,
he
Darla
came
mode.
over and he just kissed me on the lips. It's like, and he like kissed me 3 times. And he was just like, great. Like he was so proud that I had his child in me. And he was just calm. No apprehension, no doubt, just strong. Like kissed me 3 times, said nothing, and was like, I love you. And like, so excited. He said, I'm so excited, so pumped, calmly. And that's it. He didn't share my panic. Um, but as I said, he's very masculine and ready and everything else like that. Like he's just so ready. I get envious of people like that. They're so
And
sure
also
of
like to
themselves.
be, yeah, so sure of themselves. And also to be a bachelor till you're 40. I mean, that's not maybe so unheard of for men, but obviously he wasn't just going to settle for just anyone. Like he needed a
Exactly.
special, he
Yep.
needed a star like Darla. He wasn't going to just be with anybody.
Right. And we
Yeah. He
started
wasn't.
off very slow, both of us apprehensive, and him too, because he's had some tumultuous long-term relationships that were very, ugly as well. And he shared those with me, I think within the first month of knowing him. Like he's very open and he shares a lot of things. And so we were both apprehensive, but for me, it moved quick. Um, for Darla, like Alpha Darla, not wanting to let anyone in to like rattle her, but for us, it was slow. It was very cautious. So I'm pregnant, and then I was like, since the COVID-19 thing, unvaccinated, fought at my,
You're
like
unvaccinated. You never would do that to
no,
yourself. No.
no, never. And throughout COVID-19, when I was working as a behavioral support worker, it was very much, encouraged, couldn't force, although they wanted to,
Yeah.
um, vaccination. So we had to do all the extras and take the extra tests, and I was just unwilling. And I think it was myself and one other individual who were just like against it. So, and that was it. And so, not vaccinated and everything else like that, wanting freedom. I always knew that part of myself, right? I'm always like, no, you're not going to tell me. That's the alpha Darla. You're not going to tell me what to do, especially with my own body.
Or you're a
Um,
matriarch. You could look at it, start looking at it that way.
and you know what? I'm starting to. I'm starting to, because it's very new. Like, Madi, my son, is only 3 months old. So it's like this leaning into and learning phase. Like, it's like this buffer zone, right?
Hmm.
Um, and it's like almost like you're cut in two. You're split in two, right? You're split into previous Darla,
You're
maiden, and
maiden.
like you said, and now motherhood Darla, which the maiden still comes with you a little bit,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
like
yeah.
it's not the dominant factor.
No.
So, and again, back to Abe's mom, like the ultimate matriarch, never worked a day in her life. Started having babies,
But
pumped
did
them out. Like,
work
well, you know what I
serving her
mean? Like
family.
worked, yeah. No, like now I realize, I'm like, how did this woman do it? She's a saint. How did she do it? I've won. She had seven, breastfeeding
Seven
them all
children.
and
I know.
everything else. Seven.
Not working out, participating in keeping a capitalist culture,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know what I want to know a crazy stat I read too the other day that the income, the dual income now that comes into a family has only increased by 5% since the 1950s when it was only a single income household. 5%.
And
That's
do you
how
know why
duped
that
we're
is?
getting. And our
Yeah, but
children.
do you know why that is though?
Why?
Because, and I'm sure some of the women listening can relate to this if they're in that sort of space, the daycare is insurmountable. The
Right.
cost for
The
daycare
cost
is
of
insurmountable.
care.
So much so that a coworker who works in my office, who both of them had to go back to work, she has two boys, she got audited by the government for taxes because they did not believe her, and that's how much she was paying for daycare for her two kids. They
You've
didn't
got to
believe
be
her.
kidding me.
I swear to God. So she had to go back and find all the receipts and resubmit. She's like, I'm being audited because they don't believe me about my daycare. I'm like, well, how much? And I didn't know because I recently moved to Nova Scotia and I didn't have kids at the time. So I'm like, well, how much is daycare? She's like, well, between the two of them, it's like 40,000 a year. And I looked at her. I'm like, is it even worth it for you to be here? Like, I actually posed that question
No,
immediately.
honestly, it is anyways, we should be so outraged. I'm just trying to get our whole family out of the whole system.
Oh,
Currently
me too.
working on that timeline.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah. So anyways, what's the point, right? And
Well, they're
the
not
both
in
of you have
daycare.
to go
They've
back.
been home with me, but it's just to not be in that whole cycle.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Exactly.
wild, Darla.
Because
Okay.
you think like if two of us go back to work, there's more money for this and that, but there's just not because
There's
someone either
not.
has to, raise your
Who
child, which I
suffers?
don't, yeah, yeah. And everyone has to do what they have to do. And
Yeah.
that's like the number one thing. But when you actually sit down and assess it, you're like, could I live more simply
Yeah.
and not go through that and be home? Because right now I'm like, I was all about corporate, but right now I'm like, how can I do this forever
Yeah.
and make it work?
Yeah.
And it's just you do a total flip. Whereas
But
before I'm like, no, I'm going back to work. I probably won't even take a full mat leave. I'll go 4 months and that's it, and blah blah. And nope, everything changes.
my
You
God,
know?
can you imagine leaving your little Monty with someone at 4 months?
No,
You
no.
no, no, no. Not after you hear the way Darla is pregnant and births her beautiful son. Yeah.
Yeah.
Such an
But
innate instinct.
yeah, it truly is. Truly is.
So you move
So
through this pregnancy.
yeah. Yeah. So we had the discussion and he's like, I don't, the system. And he's like, I don't want him being vaccinated. I'm like, me too.
Hmm.
I don't want, and I came from the system and I've seen it and I worked in it and I would walk in it. And I said, I was a part of it. I still am because I work for them. And I said I didn't want that for him. I didn't know he was a him at the time, but I didn't want that for my baby. And he didn't either. So we were very on the same page. It wasn't even like a conflict. It's like, should I homeschool? I'm like, I'm going to homeschool him. I don't even want him in school. Like that was my instant knee jerk reaction to being pregnant. So
Hmm.
we had all those conversations. I knew that I wanted him at home. My sister, she homeschools her kids because they go travel everywhere because he's a Marine. And she homeschools them. She stays home. She's, a mother and that's what she is.
Shout out
And
to Kiki.
right, shout
I'm
out to
shouting it.
50 Kiki, the one who's our
You,
designated driver for years. But
we've
she'll
come so
appreciate
far.
that,
We've come
right?
so far.
It's true. Oh my gosh.
Uh,
But yeah, you have to go through all these things to get here,
yeah,
right? If we
you
were still
do.
doing those things, I feel like something
Oh,
would be
well, yeah.
very wrong. It's like those people who get caught in the hairstyle, like at that point in high school, and then they just carry it through their whole lives.
That's so
Like that's
true.
the equivalent of still going to the clubs and everything.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
just like you gotta grow up, you got to.
God.
And how beautiful it is to age, right?
Mm.
So anyways, she does it, and our kids are, yeah, I don't know. There's just a difference there, and I knew that before I even got pregnant. Like her oldest, who's 19 now, which blows my mind, she was homeschooled her entire life, and she was learning at university level in high school. I mean, it comes at a cost in the United States, like they have to pay for everything, but she's just a great human being,
Just a
right?
great human. They have,
She doesn't have any influence. She's very polite. And I think it's like when we get to stay at home, we're teaching our kids, we're like who they look up
we're the
to,
value
right?
system. Their nervous
Exactly.
systems, get to regulate with us
Yeah.
and their values get to
Yeah.
integrate. Yeah. There's
And
no
you know
one
what,
else's agenda being pushed on them.
right? And you
Yeah.
know what and this is to no disrespect to anyone who likes the school and needs the school because they have to work and whatever. This is just my personal opinion, but
Yeah.
this is my and that's why I learned this process too, like zero judgment on
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
But my analogy is if it's my value system and I don't align with the school's value system or the system's value system, it's like sending your kid off to their grandparents where it's like free for all because they get them for a bit and they instill whatever, and then they come home to you and you have to undo everything,
Mhm.
right? You have to get them back in your routine, back to the thing. And that's like my analogy for the system. They send you off, you're
Mm.
trying to instill these values at home, and then you send the system and it's like, okay, and let's be honest, when our
It's
kids get to a
confusing.
certain age, it's confusing. They're really into their peers because they're new and fun and cool and they don't discipline them, right? So their peers are their number one influence.
Hmm.
And if all of them are doing it, they're gonna want to do it. And
That's right.
mom and dad are just like the lame people at home who are mean. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I mean, those peers are all coming from a disembodied place as well, from their own households. So
Yeah.
that's just not a value system that jives for our family and for
No,
our
me neither.
sons. No,
Me
no.
neither. That personal. And it's interesting because Abel was even he has contrast too, right? He's like, well, I came from a Muslim town And I moved to Canada and it was like free for all here. And my poor parents had the hardest time keeping us because they all went to school, right? They didn't
Right.
homeschool. And they had the hardest time keeping all their values in check and everything else like that, especially when, Niagara Falls is where they moved to. And that's not at the time, there was no mosque, there was no culture there.
Yeah.
It was like they weren't welcome.
No.
Everyone thought they were weird, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's,
um,
yeah, Niagara Falls is such a different vibe. Well, different
yeah,
types of immigrants immigrated to Niagara Falls.
yeah,
Not
right?
not Muslims. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And now it's more culturally acceptable and everything. There's mosques
Absolutely.
there. It's beautiful. But at the time, way
Yeah.
back in like 1989, oh gosh, no,
Yeah.
right?
No.
Mom didn't even have anywhere to go to pray, she was saying. So they built that community. So it was great. So pregnancy, yeah, I started the first trimester. I was very cautious
So you
because,
didn't seek out medical attention, or you didn't seek
no,
out any sort of
no,
medical. No.
I knew that from day one. I didn't want to.
Oh, you
I
talked to
didn't
me though. I
I
remember
did talk
getting a
to you. You were
Voxer.
my intention. I was like, and I think I remember saying to you, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I said, but I know I don't want to do that.
And we hadn't talked in
Like,
a lot of years. You were just
no, it
following
wasn't.
my podcast, and then you
It's
reached out
true.
to me
Yeah.
on Voxer and
Yeah.
said you were pregnant.
Yeah. You're the first one I told, actually. You're the first one I told. We didn't even tell family. We kept everything a secret. And you're the first one I told because I just knew that you would get it because I was following you. I had you on my Instagram and everything else like that. And I knew I was more aligned with that, even though I wasn't. Like as Darla, I was still like, I got a breast augmentation. I still like, you know what I mean? Like I wasn't very embodied in like the natural living style. But I knew when it came to being pregnant that I didn't want that. I didn't want to be the system. I didn't want any part of that. And I just knew that I could trust in you to not judge and just unfold.
Mhm.
And
Thank you.
you're welcome. You're the only one
I
who knew.
love you.
I love you too. Yeah, you're the first soul we told. And I just needed to grab onto somebody because I knew it was going to be rough. I was very cautious in the first like 12 weeks. In fact, I think Abe wanted me to take another pregnancy test like 2 days later because we were just in this state of denial. Like, we're like, is this truly happening? Like, we didn't time it. Like, we didn't time it. We didn't want it. And I'm like, my immediate reaction was like, your mom's going to freak because she would pray 5 times a day for that. She told us every time we came over, she would bug us to the point where Abe would get mad. She's like, Mom, just please. And we didn't tell her we were trying, like, or not being careful. We just kind of would shrug her off every single time. Um, and it's interesting because out of all his siblings, there's another one who doesn't have any children, and she doesn't really bug him. She bugged Abe. Like she
Oh,
wanted
isn't that
Abe to have a child.
interesting?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Now the rest of them have kids, so there's just Abe and his brother left. But his mom was so in love with me, I think, honestly. And we were together. She's like, "What are you doing? When are you gonna grow up? Why are you wasting your time? What are you waiting for?" And she used to always look at me and say in English because she's very Arabic speaking.
Yeah.
She would always say in Arab in English, Darla, listen to me. She'd say, listen to me. She's like, a heaven with no people is not a heaven. And she would say that over and over again, saying like, if you don't have a family, like, what are you doing here? Like that she was just very family oriented, which is so refreshing, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
from Niagara Falls and like the West, I would say, the Western civilization, who's like, it's okay, and it is okay. It is
It
okay
is.
to not choose not to have kids and everything else like that. But for her, it was like a non-negotiable.
And you wonder
Like,
why we don't speak about the magic of how beautiful it is to come in union with family and
right?
your babies. Yeah. And it's an easier way, I think, to control you too and keep
And
you
I
outside of
think so too.
yourself.
And
Yeah.
it's almost deemed as a lesser than, oh, you're
Absolutely it is.
just, or you're just, like they just put that word, just a mom, just, oh, that's what you're doing. Like, it's not like this grandiose, you know,
Way
like,
back when, I mean, mothers, and I don't know in the Muslim culture if it speaks to this in the Quran, but like women are a valued part of society and survival and the whole structure in which we are here. Like there's such a high value placed on the sacredness that is woman and a womb and children.
well, since you mentioned the Quran, it's the highest about in the Quran they state, The gates to heaven are under the mother's feet. So that's what it is. It's like the mothers are everything
Yeah.
in the Quran, right?
And I just had a woman on my podcast who referenced the Quran as well about the vomiting and the uneasy stomach during pregnancy. And it references
Mhm.
in the Quran somewhere that I hope I don't get this right. It's from Needy's episode. But just how when you're in your masculine, you're not actually able to keep anything down. So you need
Mm,
to be able to be in your feminine, and the book
yeah,
speaks to that in order to digest and your womb to be nourished.
right.
So
Well,
it's
in
so
the
interesting how
Quran,
many women are so nauseous and even have like such severe vomiting and not able
yeah,
to hold on to their nutrients because that's how steeply ingrained you are in the masculine.
right? Like down to a
Mhm.
cellular level, right? Like
Yes,
it's just
that's
like
right.
you can't be a mom. Like you can't be this feminine.
That's
And now
right.
I can say like being a mother is the ultimate femininity. It forces you to. You can't be an alpha mom.
Mm,
It doesn't exist. You know, like it, you can't,
mm-mm.
unless you pass off your child and, you get a nanny and you just go back right to work. Like it does not allow you to.
No.
And labor and birth, no, like there's nothing masculine about it. For me, anyways, it's just like I couldn't. Even
Yeah.
if I tried and I tried resisting, nope, it wouldn't allow me to, which is so insane to me. So after we were pregnant and another test, and I think my first trimester, I was nauseous. I was definitely nauseous. I didn't vomit. I could still eat. And so I hid it. I hid it from work. I hid it from family, because we were so treading lightly because of the stats, right? Like, so I'm like, I might lose it. Like, what are the chances of? So it went from what are the chances of me getting pregnant statistically to what are the chances of me carrying it to full term.
Mm.
So we were even cautious about getting excited, So it was just like miscarriage is very high for my age, and so this might happen. It's my first pregnancy. Like, let's not get excited or anything else. So we were very cautious. And I didn't go seek medical care. I didn't see a doctor. I didn't even confirm it medically or anything else like that. And then April came and I was still driving, commuting to work. I didn't tell my boss and everything else like that. So April came and we wanted to get away. We wanted to go on vacation. We were dying to. It was a long winter in Nova Scotia, which they are. So we booked a trip, like a once in a lifetime trip to Bahamas. So we went to like a deserted island called Eleuthera. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, 'cause I know you've been to the
No, because we
Bahamas.
did Bahamas, but we did like Bahamar, like
NASA?
so.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. No, you have to
yours
fly
sounds
into there,
beautiful.
but you take a little tuna can airplane out to an island, and it's
Oh,
just like people, there's expats there, but there's like one grocery store, 150 beaches, private,
oh my gosh.
beautiful, eating off the land. You can't get anything shipped in there. There's no hospital. It was just deserted. And that's what I wanted, especially with my career. I was like, I need to go and be away from talking to anybody. I need a deserted beach. So we did. We planned to go there. And I think we were there for 2 weeks. And the plan was fly home to Niagara, not go back to Nova Scotia, and tell his family that we were pregnant in April. So by that time, I was what, 4 months?
Yeah.
December, January, February, March, April. Because I got pregnant in December.
September.
That's why
Yeah.
my period was late in January. And that's
Okay.
why I missed it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we landed in Niagara, the mom had, oh, this is the trip. Okay. So while we knew we were pregnant and didn't tell a soul but you,
Wait,
um,
oh, let's go back to though, because before you took up on this trip, you were sort of in this place of like, I'm pregnant. I haven't sought anything out. I'd kind of like to know,
yeah,
maybe a little bit of information.
I just wanted
S-
to know because, okay, I was struggling with because I was listening to your podcast and I related so well with the women you've had on there. But like, I didn't want anyone with a view into my womb. Like, I didn't want that. I just
Right.
wanted it to happen. I just wanted, and my innate instinct was, I want it to be me, Abe, and God,
But
because that's
also
who
on the
made it.
podcast, there's elements of technocratic parts that you can bring in if it feels called.
And that's why I felt okay. So I think I messaged you. I'm like, listen, I
Yeah.
kind of want an ultrasound,
Hmm.
to confirm. Like, I just wanted to hear that he was truly there. It was like
Yeah.
this odd state of denial, and I wanted to know he was okay.
Yeah.
And that was just natural for me, I think. But at the same time, now that I'm looking back at it, I'm like, that's not me. That's me being alpha again, needing to
To
control.
control. And
because
you
the
and it, you
feminine
tried to
instinct,
go. I remember you
I
tried to
did. I
go
went to one.
access and they
I
pissed you
did.
off.
Oh my
So
gosh.
you
And it was
Voxered
like,
me.
it was constant, right?
Yeah,
So Abe was like, okay, let's go. Let's go get an ultrasound. Let's make sure he's like, or he at the time, we didn't know it was a he, but make sure he's got all the parts. I'm like, okay, well, medical care in Nova Scotia is next to impossible. There's just a shortage. So no one has a family doctor for years, wait lists, whatever. So we had to go to a walk-in clinic. So, like Darla fashion, didn't want to go to any walk-in clinic. I wanted to go like an hour out to one that was highly rated, right? So I'm like, okay. So we went into the walk-in clinic. I said, I took a test. So I think I'm pregnant. She's like, okay, go wait for the doctor. And this and that. The doctor came in, took my blood pressure. Everything was fine. He's like, what brings you in today? I told him. He's like, okay. So he gets out his little form. I'm like, I would like to be referred to the IWK because the IWK is a hospital in Nova Scotia that specializes in women and birth. Okay. And I knew that was the only one I trusted because everyone at work, I would hear them talking about the IWK. So, and it was an hour out from where I lived. So he's like, okay. So I thought he was just going to give me a referral so I can get an ultrasound. No. So obviously he gets out his pad and his paper and he starts with all these permissions. I would like to test you for this. I would like your consent to test you for this. I would like you to go here and get tested for that. And I was like, no. And he's like, no. I'm like, no, I don't want to. I just like an ultrasound. And he's like, looked at me and he's like, kind of confused by me. Like he's never even heard it. And he's like, well, what? And then he's like, I was like, yeah, I just want an ultrasound. I don't want to do all of these tests. And he's like, well, you have to. I'm like, well, and then me being court like Darla, I was like, well, didn't you just ask for my consent? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, well, I don't consent. I would like an ultrasound. And I know that you can't deny somebody medical care if they request it.
that's
That's
right.
illegal in Canada, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so he's like, listen, and I'll never forget this quote. If you want, with this tone, medical care pre-med for labor in the Western world, this is what you have to do. And I stood up and I looked at Abe and I'm like, let's go. And we walked out. Interestingly enough, I didn't know this, but they did refer me to the IWK without me getting those tests. And I went to get to the clinic in April, and he said he was going to put me on a high risk emergency situation because he last asked me my last period was, and I would ask my age, right? I'm a high risk, obviously. I'm geriatric. And guess when the IWK called me for my ultrasound,
Wasn't
which
it
I didn't even know he
August?
referred me there. No, it was July.
Oh, it was
So
July.
close.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I knew it was
So I'm
something
due in
insane because
September,
I,
technically. Like
yeah.
I'm due in September, and you didn't contact me until July. So you did refer me. I didn't need to get those tests. And she actually called and said, hi, Darla, you have an appointment for an ultrasound on Tuesday?
I remember
I'm
you were
like,
so
no.
pissed.
Oh, so mad. So mad.
But so what
So
did we come up with? What did we come up with over Voxer? Oh yeah,
so
when you
you
were going to
just
go to
said
Bahamas.
I was gonna go to the Bahamas and thank God for you. My
I
gosh, thank God for you. Like this is why, God brought me to you and like message you because you're like, Darla, this is them instilling fear. No, she's like, you're like, I've been to the Bahamas. Why don't you just go there and pay for one? And I said, what? That's a thing? You're like, yeah. And you sent me all these links. And sure enough, I had already had the Bahamas booked for April, and I went to the walking clinic in April. I made an appointment from Nova Scotia, and I booked an ultrasound. I didn't have to see a doctor. I didn't have to do anything. I booked an ultrasound just as it were in the Bahamas on my final day,
Mhm.
right? Because I didn't want it in the beginning in case something were awry there and ruin my whole vacation. So I booked
Yeah,
it on my final day before I was flying out. So then again, still that fear, right? Like, because I'm booking it on the final day thinking if something's wrong, I don't want to know at the beginning of my vacation,
yeah,
which is crazy. So I paid $150 and worth every penny.
yeah.
And even that was, oh, here,
I
do you
hear
hear him, Maddie?
Do you need
Yeah.
him? Does he need his
No,
mama?
Abe's with him. He's just talking on his little change table there. But anyways,
But wasn't
he
I mean, the technician was really sacred as well. I think there was some few
yes,
divine.
that's why. Yeah, because I sat down with her and she was sitting there and she had the screen turned towards Abe, like I couldn't see it. And she was on my stomach and she's sitting there and she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, won't stop moving. I can't get a good picture of him because she's like, I'm not allowed, honey, to give you a picture. She's like, but I'm going to sneak this. Because I told her as I was laying there about, she's like, why are you getting an ultrasound here? Like you're Canadian and whatever. Like, why are you here? So I told her the story about the clinic and everything going on. She's like, she just couldn't believe it. She's like, that's shocking. I'm like, it's not like that
Mm,
here. We can come here. It's like freedom and you can give me whatever I ask for without the judgment. And
that's
she goes,
right.
yeah. She's like, yeah, honey. Yes, you can. She's calling me honey and everything. And then she looks at me and she says, I'm like, I didn't want all those tests before and everything else like that. And, the the test for Down syndrome and everything else, sticking like the needle in. She's like, well, no, honey, he's here. He's not going anywhere. I'm like, he? She's like, oh. And then she realized she let it slip. She's like, it's a he. I was like, oh, I'm having a boy. And then
Mhm.
Abe, I'll never forget the look on Abe's face because the screen was pointing to him, and he was like holding his chin and just like his eyes were gonna start watering, and I was just looking at him like, "What? Is everything okay?" Like I was panicked, right? And he's like, he was speechless. He couldn't even say anything, and he was just like, "I can't believe I made that." She's like, "That's him," and she was telling him what part was and everything else like that. He's like, he's here, like he's fine, like he's got 10 fingers, 10 toes, and everything else. And she's like, "Do you want to see the doctor after? It's your choice." And I said, "No." And then I was like, I just wanted to hear the heartbeat. So she turned the heartbeat on and heard that. She's like, strong. And then she was even like, you do what you're gonna have to do. God is gracious. She said, God is gracious. He's here. He's coming. There's no test that's gonna take that away. She's like, we all, had birth at one point in our lives. She's like, so you just carry that home with you and don't let anyone tell you any different. And that was an ultrasound tech in the Bahamas. Like I was meant to see her,
Yes.
Like it was just
Yeah.
crazy. So after, the Bahamas and, meeting her, I was like, this is meant to, I always think this is meant to be. I'm always looking for that deeper meaning. Like even when I went to the clinic, it was like Madi, my son, he was like, no, Darla. Like that's what it was like he was saying. This is not what you want. Like this is not necessary. This is your validation that your choice is correct. And this isn't the right fit for you. And then when I saw her, it was like, of course you're talking to me about how gracious and strong he is. And she actually, I didn't even know how far along I was because, like I said, my period was, I'm like, did I get pregnant in January? Because remember, you and I were trying to figure it out.
Yeah. My wheel.
Right. And at
I
this
love.
point, we still hadn't told anyone. And it was just so sacred between him and I. It was just so sacred because it's all our decisions, no outside influence. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So that was the beauty in it because, people well intentioned, when you tell them, everyone has their questions and their opinions. And I'm one to get very overwhelmed and shut down, and I'll just shut down. So I didn't want that with this. So we flew home and I had bought, I knew his mom was going to be like, I was most excited to tell her out of my parents, out of his whole entire family, who I knew they would all be, so excited because it was her that wanted this the most, right? And she just thought it was never going to happen. She was bugging us, I think, for 2.5 years at this point. So I got her a little onesie, a little baby onesie for her. I made it a big deal. And I put it in a Bahamas bag because I wanted to act like I got her something from Bahamas, which was be natural for us to bring something home from our vacation. But in the Bahamas bag, the onesie was white and it had in calligraphy writing a dua come true. And dua means prayer in Islam, a prayer come true. So we were so, like, it was so pumped. It was a boy because in Islam, if you have a son, first, you are no longer Ibrahim and you're no longer Darla. You are Abu Mahdi, means Mahdi's dad. They don't call you by your name anymore. They call you by your son. Like your title's now like Abu Mahdi and
Mm.
mine's M Mahdi. So they won't call me Darla anymore. They call me M Mahdi. They introduce you. This is M Mahdi. They call
Oh
you by
my
your son's name.
gosh.
Yeah, it's so crazy. So
Wow.
we got there and we came in the house. We waited a bit. I wore really baggy clothes because at this point I was showing, but not huge. Because with your first pregnancy, as you know, you don't like pop. It's like a slow progression. So I had a big baggy sweatshirt on and pants, and they didn't even know. And his sister came over and we had dinner. And the mom was so excited to see us. They were talking about their vacation. And I'm like, oh, we got you something. I should have recorded it. But I was just so in the moment, which has been this whole pregnancy. Like, I just didn't want like to show it and record it, but I wish I did now, hindsight. But I gave her the bag and we were all sitting in the living room. So she opens it and I was standing up behind the couch And she opens it, she's looking at it, she's like, she reads it and she's mouthing it to herself. And she's just kind of sitting there shocked. She's like, a baby? A baby. She all of a sudden she looks at me, she doesn't even look at Abe. She's like, a baby? And I thought for sure she was gonna, hug Abe first and everything else. And I'm like, I nodded yes. I'm like, we're having a boy. And she stood up and screamed like they all do. And she came and she just wrapped her arms around me and started bawling like it was me, like I gave her her gift. And she was just so happy. And then obviously we can't have a child out of wedlock. That's not just acceptable. And I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life from the first moment I met him anyways. So she was like, that's it, we're calling the Sheikh. That was her second thing. And the Sheikh is someone who marries you. And I was like, and you know what it was, Tori? Like, sorry, I call her Tori. It's
I
just nothing
am
Tori to
Tori.
me. Like, I didn't want a wedding. I
Hmm.
didn't want the huge show and the huge dance and the huge everything. But because it was this way, I was like, and Abe didn't want that either. He hates being like the center of attention in that way with all the pressure. And in the Arabic world, the weddings are very grandiose, right? They're very European and there's fireworks and everything. And the mom didn't care. She just wanted to call the sheikh and have him over. So we were home in Niagara, I think, for a week before we went back home. And within that, his sister, God love her, Reina, she's like my light. She's like the oldest sister, and she loved me. We get along so well. She took me to Toronto and she got me an abaya. She got me fitted. We brought it home. The sheikh came over. It was just immediate family. He married us in the living room. And with then, it's like, you offer each other a gift. It's not this huge show. The gift can be a Quran. Like the gift isn't these huge rings or anything else. It's very simple. It's very humble. And the mom's wish was like it shouldn't, she didn't want us being um, living in sin, essentially, right? And for us, there was no anxiety for me. And this is something that would cause me great anxiety to have to commit to somebody or to be pregnant or anything else like that. It was a different Darla. I
Yeah.
couldn't wait. I couldn't wait. And so we had, a huge dinner and dessert, and we sat there, and it was a huge family. It was just so intimate and special. And I loved every second of it. And the mom was happy. And
Mahdi
the
got to
sheikh,
experience it too.
yeah,
How
he did.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And the sheikh was there, and he says all these things to repeat after him. And it was just so interesting because he would always just say, even though my parents weren't there, they knew where I was getting married and everything, but they weren't there. And he would still say, Robert's daughter. Like he would still call my parents and he asked my parents' name and say Robert's daughter, this and that. It was just so nice. And afterwards, we stayed for about a week and then we left. And while we were leaving on the driveway, the mom always was bugging us to come back home because it was devastating that we moved to Nova Scotia because she was so close with Abe. Like Abe, before he met me and moved out, he had a house, sold it, kind of did some work afar, and then came back. And so he lived in an apartment in the basement of his parents' house. So him and his mom were like this. Like, even though she had all her kids, she loved all of them. Um, he spent the last 8 years or 9 years living there before moving in with me. So in my mind, I'm the one who took her son away, the last one living at home, right? So she was always like, "You come back home, move here. I'll come buy a house here." Like she would tell me that. She'd corner me in the kitchen, because she just wanted us around. And now that we're having a baby, she definitely wanted us home. And in Islam, there's 5 pillars in the religion, and the final pillar, after you've done everything else, is to go to Mecca. And Mecca is the cube, the black cube that everyone sees, that everyone walks around, and to go to Hajj, it's called. And then after you do that, and you go on a pilgrimage, so to speak, and you do this treacherous thing in Saudi Arabia, and it's so hot, and you walk and you pray every single day, um, all your sins are wiped clean. That's what they say. You come back as a baby. So you start over and you go right to Jannah, which is what they call heaven. And it's the last pillar. So after you do that, you're complete and you're for sure going to heaven. That's what they say. So she had booked this in January and she couldn't wait. This is like my version of buying like another supercar. Like she couldn't wait. This was like her be all end all. So she told us, I'm going to Hajj in June. And so throughout that whole time, she was praying for a baby. And before they leave for Hajj, you have to make everything right with everybody so that your sins can be wiped clean as a mother. So the fact that him and I were living, not married, and without a child and everything, that's she'd have to pray extra hard because it's frowned upon in Islam. So we did that for her, not knowing she was going to Hajj. She told us in April that she booked Hajj going in June. Because Abe and I were like, it's so hot there. Like it's 100 degrees. You're gonna go to Hajj. Like she was 72 and like we were worried. And she's like, yep, yep, yep. She was so excited. So she's like, you come see me after. Like, come see me after Hajj, because we were home in April. We are gonna come home after she got back, because then there's a huge celebration for them, for her
Mhm.
and her husband, because, they're they did their last pillar of Islam, the last
Mhm.
thing you have to do before you die. So we came home. I still didn't tell anyone. I still didn't seek medical care. I went on with the pregnancy. And you and I talked a lot, I think, and I was trying to find, do you want, I don't know if I should tell her story or if I should go right into the birth companion because they kind of intertwine. I
Yeah,
just don't know what would be
yeah.
more confusing.
No.
You and I had the conversation. I'm like, I wanted a birth companion. And
Right.
we're getting down to the wire here because now I quote unquote had a due date of September 11th. Is it September 11th? Yeah. So I started shopping around and in no, I call it shopping around, trying to connect with people. And you were sending me people. You put it out there because you didn't have any connections, so to speak, in Nova Scotia.
Right.
And it's not normal, like it's not as common here, I don't think, as in Ontario. Like it's
Hmm.
just not a thing here. And if you've ever been to Nova Scotia, Nova Scotians are lovely people, but they're very much into the system.
Hmm.
So I started talking to a few birth companions, and they're all very lovely and amazing in their own way. I just wasn't connecting with them, because you have to connect. You
Yeah.
do. This person is going to be with you. And for me, I was already apprehensive because A, of my age, B, I've never done this before, C, I've never even looked into this. Like I just didn't know what it entailed. Like there's people who want to be mothers and read all the books and everything else. That wasn't me. So one person I connected lovely with, but she'd never been there. Like this would be her first time. And I'm
Right.
like, no, I can't. I'm like, and I would so value her for telling me that, probably even feeling that was my stance.
Yeah.
She's like, I totally understand. She's like, if you don't, want to quote unquote have me there and everything else. And she was great. And I just told her like I was honest. I was like, it's nothing for you. I need somebody with experience here so they can hold me and so reassure me because I'm not confident in this at all. I was like, I'm just not. And
You
she's like,
were,
okay,
you were, you just, it's yeah, it's your first two. You were
yeah.
confident. You had
I
sovereignly
just didn't know what to
held and
expect.
right.
Maybe that's the thing. I didn't know what to
Yeah.
expect. And I wanted somebody who knew what to expect and had lived it to be like, if things were going awry, they could be like, hey, Darla, this is normal. I needed that. Whereas I knew in my heart and soul that if that person was there and told me it's normal, I'd be like, well, how would you know? I'd be like, how would you know? You've never done this before.
Right. Right.
Um,
You needed that back. Well, at one point you're offering to pay my whole family to come out to Nova
I did.
Scotia. And
But you
Ryan's
know
like,
what?
no, we cannot plan that. Like, that's insane.
I'm like, I'll put you in Airbnb. I'll do whatever. Can you just come here? I'll fly
I'm
you in.
like,
I'll fly you out. Yeah, I did. And I wanted to. I didn't
I
care what it
know.
cost,
I
honestly,
had to
Tori.
really
And
do
I didn't,
some inner work on that. And I thought,
I
no,
think I want to apologize to you because I
no.
feel like,
I
yes, because
wanted to do it so
I
bad.
just feel like that's a lot to ask somebody and a lot of pressure. And for you, in your empathy and your love for me, to be able to be like, I don't know if I could do this, I feel like I put you in such a position of letting me down. And
No, I
I didn't want
trusted
you
the
to feel that.
universe was going to hold you. I trusted
Okay.
the universe and I had to consult my intuition and my dream and just you too. But I knew you were going to be held. You were so held up into this point. So,
I just felt like it was having my sister there with me. Like that was like you're my
mm,
sister. So it was like
mm,
not only you're my sister, but you just have lived it. You have so much experience. And I only shared it with you since day one. And I didn't want anyone else but you. I just didn't. And
yeah,
it
you were
didn't
set
matter
on
if
that.
it was, God love her, if it was Billy herself, like that was here, because Billy is, the be all end all, but
The,
she's not you. You know what I mean? That's how I
oh,
felt in my heart. Like that's not
mm.
you. Like I need Tori. And I kept
But
saying
we
that to
got
other
you a
people.
good version because she's
I'm
also a
I
sister
actually
of mine.
thought she reminded me so much of you. Like when she talked to me, I'm like, no one's you. And I think I messaged you about that.
We'll,
I'm like, she reminds me so much of you. I'm like, she's not you. I
we'll
said,
get to
obviously,
that,
like,
but
yeah. So, anyways, I talked to a few of them and I actually started kind of panicking. Like,
hmm.
I might have like a complete free birth, just me and Abe here. And I'm like, I wonder if I could just Zoom Tori and like have
Hmm.
her, I'm like, here. so to talk me through it, but it's not the same, right? Like,
No, no.
and for I wanted someone for Abe too,
Yeah.
because
Witness
he's
all your
never
whole
been to this
family.
before, and he doesn't. And I knew if I'm up there in the cosmos and everything, God love him, like he's not gonna know what to do, like to he's gonna just read off me, right? He's gonna be like, okay, let's go to the hospital, or this is it.
Yeah.
Like I didn't want him to panic either. I wanted him to be comfortable.
Yeah.
I needed that.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't want him to be like we're alone and whatever. And to be fair, when we did tell everybody after April that we were pregnant, the number one question and concern from family and friends alike is, oh, so who's your doctor and who's going to be your OB and did you find care out there in Nova and where are you having the baby? All the typical loving questions that come with being pregnant.
Yeah. What did you
And
tell them?
we're not. And usually with Abe's family, he spoke and was like, because he's so passionate about it. It
Yeah.
wasn't like me to say that. It was him to say that, right? He's just so passionate and they would kind of
He
look at
owned
me
it.
like, Darla, like, is this what you want? Because they think he's the alpha, right? He's like making all the decisions for me. But they would kind of look at me like, do you want this? Like, in fact, when we told his mom, she said, sure. Sure means what in Lebanese. She's like, no, you go to the hospital because she was even worried,
Mm.
because I'm not a spring chicken, as they say, right? She was even worried, right? And he's like, so then it became a pattern, right? Everyone was like, what do you mean? You need to go see somebody. And they just started, and this is why I'm like, this is why intuitively I kept it a secret for so long because they're so sacred. And
Mhm.
then, nothing could shake me. I knew I didn't want the hospital. I was just tired of explaining it.
Yeah.
So I looked at Abe, I'm like, can you just like not volunteer the information anymore? Can we just like, if they ask, and it got to the point, even, God love my colleagues at work. Once I actually told them I was pregnant, I had to tell my boss because for this promotion, I wanted to apply, but it was so close to my due date. I didn't want to be like, oh yeah, I have this job and now guess what? I'm going on mat leave. Like I didn't think that was fair because I knew it was like a designated position that they'd have a hard time filling in my absence. So I closed the door and I told her, and I love her. My boss is amazing, but I told her, I'm like, I want to apply for this. I did it before I applied. I'm like, I want to apply for this position, but I have to tell you, I'm like, I'm pregnant and I'm due in September. She's like, where are you hiding this thing? Because I didn't look pregnant and I hid it really well. And I was just like, I didn't pop, I don't think, until the last 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
But when I told her, she's like, Darla, this isn't 1952. You can apply for this position and I can't hold it against you because you're leaving because you're having a baby. If you're the best candidate for this position, you will be granted this position. But part of me still thought, they know I'm pregnant, it's a hard position, I'm not going to get it, they're going to give it to somebody else. Like that's what I thought.
Wow.
So I ended up getting it because,
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
Alpha Darla. So, or it was. And, and for comparison, the last person who got a role like this, it took them 8 years. And I got it and working there in one. So that's how alpha
Mm.
and ridiculous I am. I
And the
can say I'm
magic of
ridiculous.
Maudie too. I think that I don't know, babies create things.
Yeah, he definitely
But
did.
yes, your hard work for sure too, love.
Right. But I wanted that security of that position and I
Yeah.
ended up getting it. And that's an interesting topic all on its own. And I'll get to that as well. But so I kind of started not telling people because even my colleagues at work were like, oh, and it's interesting because one of my colleagues who I'm close with, her daughter got pregnant at the exact same time I did. So she was in all of my stages. And by comparison, she was doing all the things that she wanted to do. So she went to the OB, she was designated as geriatric, she's 35. And so she would come into work and she would compare. She's like, Darla, she goes, see the IWK, did you do this? And everything else like that. They didn't know. I didn't tell them I was having a free birth, right? Like I didn't tell them unassisted because sometimes it's just easier not to,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You weren't telling them that it was going to be a home birth or
That's
that you
right.
were looking into different outside of the system supports.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm like, they're like, oh, you're gonna have a midwife, right? They start naming all the things.
Mhm.
And I said, they're like, well, what about a doula? And I'm like, I just don't want to have it at the hospital. Like that's what I would say.
Yeah.
And they didn't find out until after because again, sometimes it's just easier
Yeah.
not to share.
Yeah. You don't need
So
other people's fears projected onto your
and
journey.
and that's why I didn't want the system either because I knew the labels they would throw at me and I was like, you know what? Nothing about this has been your statistic. My getting pregnant organically, and I broke that statistic. My carrying it this long, the baby, broke that statistic. And now I'm like, okay, which one's next? Which one next do I have to shut down? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was becoming a pattern. And every single time that I would get over a hurdle, I would say, in my own mind and with the system and everything else, I just felt more powerful. And I was like, yeah, I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
this. I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I started leaning into myself more and listening
Yeah. Yeah.
and then listening to him,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm like, this knowledge, these thoughts aren't coming out of nowhere because they've never been here before. They're coming from something and someone. So, it's through him. He's telling me I have to listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
So I started leaning into that and trusting a little bit more rather than doubting and looking for all the fray and
Mm-hmm.
then coming back. I had to because I was like, as soon as I went to that clinic and I got denied, well, not denied, but as soon as I got into the car, I was so mad. I was talking to Abe and he's like, I'm like, I knew it. I knew it that this was going to treat me. This is why I don't like going to this. And he looked at me and I was freaking out. And him being him, he grabbed my hand in the car. He's like, babe, we never have to go back there again. Don't get upset. We're not going back. Don't worry. And he's like, message Tori. So I think I did. And you made me feel better, like instantaneously. You're like, Darla, don't worry. This is what it is in Bahamas and go. That's what you need to do. Did I need the ultrasound from the Bahamas looking back? No. But I'm so glad I did
Mm.
because of that woman and everything else and seeing him. And it just made it solidify for me. And then finding out it was a boy and being able to tell his mom that. And it was interesting because while we were at the house, we were talking about names, and Abe was so excited. I wanted to be bold, as Darla always is, and be over the top. And I wanted to name him Islam. I wanted to name him the Word of God
Oh, I
because I
got
felt
goosebumps.
like, I know, because I felt like he's here because of that. I reverted. The mom prayed on it every day. It's a powerful name. I know in today's society, it's probably going to be rejected a lot. And like Islam, like people tend to hide it in the West, right? That they're Muslim and everything else like that.
Right.
And I wanted that so bad and I loved it. And Abe's like, no, Mahdi. I'm like, Mahdi. And then my reaction was like, no, everyone's going to call him Maddie. And then everyone's going to call him, the white people are going to call him Matt. And I'm white, so I can say that because no one's going to be able to pronounce it properly. And I'm like, Islam, you can't mispronounce. And he's like, no. He's like, I used to watch this video and it's called Salam Ya Mahdi, which means welcome Mahdi. And Mahdi in the Quran is the last prophet they're waiting for. And the name Mahdi means the awaited one, the anointed one. Like he's not here yet. So
Mm-hmm.
I asked Abe gently not to share our names with the family because I knew everyone was going to have their opinions, right? But he couldn't help it because he's so excited. So when we were home in April, he told his mom, she's like, what are you going to name them? And he's like, well, Darla wants Islam. And the mom looks at me. She's kind of giving me a face like she didn't hate it, but she was kind of like, that's bold, right? And she was just so proud of me for praying and coming over there anyways and loving the culture. But he's like, I want Mahdi. She's like, yes. His mom loved the name Mahdi, always has. She's like, yes, Mahdi. And she looked at me and she was like, Mahdi, yes. Like, that's for my Ibrahim, Mahdi. That's what she said. Like, you listen to him. He knows what he's talking about. And you know what? In hindsight, I was like, okay, because Mahdi means the anointed one, and there's like no better perfect name. Now I look at him, I'm like, no, I can't even imagine him being in Islam, right? So his
Mm-hmm.
mom confirmed, and he looked at me, he's like, you have to go with what my mom wants. I'm like, okay, fine, because I didn't hate it. I just was in love with Islam, right? So I'm like, it's his son. I'm gonna give him the power to name his son, and so I did. And we came home. Like I said, I started applying for promotions. I just kept going to work. I commute an hour in, an hour out. Um,
That's when we do our Voxers
That's when we do
or
our
connect
Voxers,
in.
yeah,
You'd
because
get
that was the
into your
only time I
feminine a
had,
little bit.
right?
I
I,
know.
I know,
Crazy.
so stupid. Now looking back at him, like I'm crazy.
Yeah.
So, it was June. I was still going to work, and people at work were like, "Darla, you can take work off early. Like you can call, it's called short-term illness, and you can get paid in full and just be at home. Like you don't have to come here with this big belly, drive an hour each way in all kinds of weather, and go to court. And especially seeing what I was seeing, right? And I was just dug my heels in, didn't listen. I'm like, no, I want this promotion. I'm going to keep coming to work. I'm going to prove to them I can do it. My boss even said it to me because she's a mother of three boys and she's younger and everything
Mm.
else. She's like, Darla, you know? So in comes a birth companion that you forgot to even think about, and I told her
Well,
that.
because
And
I
she's
I
like your best
Googled,
friend.
I Googled with yeah, my best friend Kasha Diana. We'll
Yeah.
post her name in the show notes. She's magic. And we met, well, I lived in Kitchener because I've lived all over Ontario just to meet all the most perfect women. I mean, moved to Niagara Falls and I met the most perfect you. So, made sense to well round, all the circle. But I Googled from because she's in New Brunswick, her address to where you are in Nova Scotia. And I was like, oh, they're like kind of Ontario. Like it's kind of like here to Toronto. So
Yeah,
I'm
she's
like,
like
I think
2 hours away, I think 2.5 hours
two and a
away.
half.
So
It's still a
it's
commitment for her. And
doable.
she has three children.
Oh yes,
So,
I'm
but
very young.
yeah, and very young. So like I messaged her and I'm like, would this be in your radius? Like, she's just a womb medicine shaman and a companion. So
Yeah.
yeah, you,
So she suggested it. You suggested her. You
Kasha.
suggested it to me, Kasha, and I was like, okay. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna call her. So I called her, and I think we spoke on the phone for like an hour. And I think by the end of it, I'm like, you're hired. And she started laughing, and she's like, hold on, Darla. She's like, let's do a video chat. Think about it. I'll
Yeah.
send you my forms and everything else like that. Like, I want you to think about this. Like, she wouldn't even let me. But I felt so connected with her in the sense of I felt confident. She knew her stuff. She was checking in with me. She emotionally checked in. She was a little bit of you. And I was like, this is the best thing. And I was nervous because we were getting under the wire.
Well,
I
and
think I
also
was
you
like a
forgot a
month
huge
out.
part of your pregnancy,
But
which was Abe's mom.
oh, I know I was going to circle back to that because I
You're
feel like
gonna
that's going to save me forget to get through. But like,
okay. Okay.
okay, I'm just looking at her picture.
Yeah, look at her
Um,
picture.
so anyways, I did hire Kasha. I'll get back to Kasha after this, but
Yeah.
in June and April we left. We went back to Nova Scotia. In June, I was getting ready for work in the morning at 5 a.m. And that's the time I have to get up like a crazy person, 7 months pregnant, still doing this stupid drive in the dark. But anyways, I get up and my phone rings and it says Rena. And I'm like, Abe's sister's calling me at 5 a.m. This is weird, but sometimes she'll call me to chat. And there's an hour difference in here in Ontario. I thought she's getting up for work. So I answered the phone happy. I'm like, hello. And it was just one of those things you'll never forget in your life. And it was Rena's daughter, Jenna, who's in her late 20s. She's like, Darla? And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, Teta died. And Teta means grandma. And I thought, oh, immediately because, and I did this for a living. So Teta, like, they have a 100-year-old grandmother who lives in Lebanon. And at the time, Abe's mom, she was at Hajj. She's in Mecca. So
Right.
she was just finishing. And while she was in Hajj and she was doing her pilgrimage and walking around, we'd get videos every day. So we knew she was okay. And she'd get videos in Mecca, like the dad would videotape her as they were doing their walk around with millions of people. And God love her. When you're in Mecca, you just want to pray and you're so happy to go to heaven. Like you're just praying constantly when you're walking around that. And we heard her prayers and she was just praying for us and Mahdi. She didn't even pray for herself. She would just pray for everybody else. She didn't even know she was being recorded. Like she's just that incredible human being. And she would send 8 voice notes from Hajj, and she's like, Inshallah, which means God willing, I'll just see you with Mahdi in your arms next year, this time, and this and that. She's like, I can't wait. She would leave him voice notes. And it was so hot there, they would walk at night because it was just too hot during the day. And we knew she was okay. And she had so much energy and so much life there. It was like she was a kid at a carnival. Like it was just so funny to see how happy she was. And she completed it. She completed it and she flew back to Lebanon from Saudi Arabia to visit all of her family in her small town because that's where she like lived, her and her husband, and they both did it. And at the end of Hajj, what they do to celebrate is they get the big lamb and they sacrifice the lamb in the halal way and they walk over the lamb so many times, and then they have a big feast. And she did that, and that was like the final thing for it. And overnight that morning, she passed away. So she did her Hajj and she passed away. And then just suddenly, like, they just found her in the bathroom the next morning and they called us. And we didn't believe it. Like, and I thought when she said Teta, I was like, oh, Teta died. And I was like, and I heard Reina screaming in the background, like, Ya Allah. And I was like, why? I was like, why is she this upset? Like, it's not that much of a shock. Like, she's 100 years old. And then Jenna's like, no. She's like, Abe's mom, because she was calling her Teta because that was her Teta to her. And Abe bolted up in bed because I had her on speaker in the kitchen. And I'll just never forget, like, his face because that was his world, right? She was like the matriarch of the family, and we just couldn't believe it. And that whole day was a blur. And I'm like, we had to go and renew our passports that day, and I booked a flight. And I called you, and I was like, listen, because everyone started saying Darla can't come bury her in Islam. You have to wash the baby and bury them like really quick because they're not allowed to, stay long. You have to wash them physically and carry them to their grave. So we didn't have time. And I remember calling you and be like, listen, the whole family, everyone's telling me like you can't get on a plane this late in your pregnancy. And I'm like, I said to Abe, like, this is a non-negotiable for me. And Abe is so funny. He's like, everyone's telling me like Darla can't go. Like his cousin's like, Darla can't go. She's going. I'm like, I'm not putting him on a flight by himself. Like, I'm not doing it. And he's like, you try tell Darla that. Like, you go on the phone, tell her she's not coming. Because I had to go there. I had to be there for her. So
Of course you did.
I remember messaging you, telling you that she passed away. And then I told her, like, I was hysterical, but I think I remember asking you, like, I just need reassurance. Like, it's okay. I'm not going to hurt my baby. Like, it's something, I can't lose him too, right? And you said, Darla, you get on that plane. My friend flew when she was in labor. I can remember you telling me that. And you said, I'll never forget your words. You're like, you get on that plane. You said, and I'll never forget the words, that Darla, I had a friend who was literally in labor on a plane. You said, you go, you get on that plane, and you let that baby feel all that love. And that was like, I'm done. Booked, flights are booked, I'm leaving. And everyone thought I was nuts. Even his sisters who were there, they already had flown out that day. So we flew out that morning at 5 a.m. And it was no easy feat, but I didn't care. It was a 20-hour to get there, and the time we had to get there, we had to fly from Halifax to Montreal, from Montreal to Dubai, from Dubai to Lebanon on multiple flights, because that's the only thing that would get us there the quickest. 20 hours of travel, 7 months pregnant. I didn't care. So we booked a flight, we got on it. Emirates is the best airline you could ever ask for, all the ways. So the flight attendant saw I was pregnant. She was like one of the first people to actually physically notice because I was trying to hide it from you in the airport. Because if you're so far along, sometimes you need a doctor's note and they won't let you on the flight.
Mhm.
So I was trying to hide it. And she came over and she had like a little toy stuffed airplane, an Emirates airplane, and a little swaddle blanket. She's like, here's a gift for your baby. And then Abe obviously is such a proud dad. So he's like, it's a boy. And he couldn't keep it together because everyone was seeing that we were in tears a lot. And he's like, my mother passed away. We're going home to bury her in Lebanon. And everyone was just so kind. And except for one part in the Dubai airport, they're jerks. So if you had to go from one gate to the next gate to make your connection, the Dubai airport's humongous, like bigger than Toronto, if you can imagine that. And we had half an hour to make it. And if we missed this flight, we were going to miss burying his mom because they were in the stage of moving her at the time. And the family was messaging me, like, where are you guys now? Well, we're on all these flights. So we had to run. I'm running. I don't know where I got the energy or even like the adrenaline from gate one. We ran for an hour. I can't run an hour on a good day without a baby. Okay. We ran for like an hour from one gate to the next gate to make this flight. I was sweating. And the flight attendant was boarding us, and the worker was looking at me. She's like, what's going on? And I'm like, we're going to miss the flight. And they were worried. They were at the final boarding. We just got there in time. And I noticed that our seats were separate because we booked last minute. And you okay?
You all done, Maddie? Mm.
He's like, yeah.
Maddie. Maddie. Mm. Mm.
I know.
I'm so glad he's here for the story.
Yeah, because he was here for the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we made it, and she's like, "Okay, calm down. Like we're sitting separately, please. Like we need to sit together." Like we were just so upset. I couldn't imagine seeing such a stranger and crying, and I couldn't imagine him being alone, like Abe. So after the flight took off, they made an arrangement and asked kind gentleman in one seat to move for us, and he did. And so we got to sit together, and we landed in Lebanon. A cousin of his graciously picked us up at the airport and drove us right to his teta's house. Like that's where his mom was waiting for us in the living room. And a funeral and a burial is not like a burial in the West.
Mm.
Um, you wash the body of your mother, so all the daughters wash the body from head to toe, and and the men carry them home, but not in a casket. You know, the sons carry them home. She's in like a swaddle, like what you do with a baby, and they carry her to the grave. And the headstones aren't like the West where they have these huge things and the bigger the better and everything. It's just whatever you want on it. And everyone's the same. It's marble in Lebanon, which is stunning, but it's cheap there. And that's it. Because everyone's equal. When they pass away, you don't take anything with you. So it's not like this competitive thing.
Mm.
So we got there, we landed in Lebanon. The dad was waiting for us. He was obviously devastated because he's the one who found her. And I just remember Abe because she was like, had her like, yeah, undid her face, and all the women were telling me like, it's like they were telling me in Arabic because my first time meeting his extended family in Lebanon, not the best thing, and they were saying come, and they all held my hand to bring us close so we could say goodbye. And they had their hands on my shoulder, but they're all like, you can't go too near her because what they wash their body in it, so they believe that it could cause miscarriage because they knew I was pregnant.
Okay.
But I didn't care. I was like, I'm not miscarrying. Like I'm standing there. It's Lebanon, so times are tumultuous. And literally, as we were saying goodbye to her in the house where we were taking to our final resting place, bombs were going off. And I didn't even flinch. So, like, bombs were going off and like shaking everything, and my dress flew up, and like, I didn't even flinch. And it was so crazy because Abe's older sister, who's like, I always call her, she's the matriarch now because she just is the oldest woman in the family now, like for all the siblings. But she's sitting there over her mom's casket, and I was standing there with her. She screams out after the bomb goes, "Where's Darla?" Like I was like, I'm right here. Like I was standing across from her. I'm like, I'm fine. They're all so concerned about me, you know, obviously because I'm carrying Maddie. And she didn't even care about herself or her mom or anything. She's like, "Where's Darla?" She screamed it. And I'm like, I'm right here. I'm fine. Because I didn't even flinch, you know? And I guess it is kind of crazy to fly somewhere and that much pregnant when there's a war going on, but I didn't care. And to hear the sisters tell the story, because they all landed there before us. And I want to tell this story because I feel like it has something to do with, not to do with me, but with her. It's almost like she knew. She had all the sisters flew in together, and they're from different parts of the world, and they're all very close with her, obviously. And Air Canada had lost all their luggage, like it was delayed, and so they had to open up the mom's luggage to find something to wear to the funeral. Like they had to find abayas in there, and the mom had bought them. She had bought them all black abayas, like each one of them with their names on them. Oh, they didn't even want to open her luggage because they couldn't manage to do it. But when they found that, they just broke down, you know? And all these beautiful stories just kept coming up afterwards, you know? Like how she wrote, she wrote like a will and by hand, and she put it in the week before she's leaving for Hajj, and she shoved it and hid it in one of her drawers. She didn't tell anyone. And they said that when they went to wash her body, and the sisters went in there and they start, watching her and stuff. Raina was like, please, mom, just give me a sign because she didn't get to say goodbye to her. And the point is, the mom, she had booked her an early flight home because she just thought she was too tired and it was too hot there. So Raina had booked her an early flight home and she just didn't make it. She passed away like that morning. But she ended up saying, please, mom, just give me a sign. And as she did that, she said like the door slammed behind her when she went to like wash her body. And Abe, I'll never forget Abe, like he was smiling. And I think someone asked him, like, why are you smiling? He's like, because look at her. She just looks so peaceful. Like, she, because they don't do anything. They don't embalm you. You go as you are. You know, they don't try and make you look pretty. There's no makeup. And the part that's crazy is for Ramadan that year when we were praying for Madi, like when we were praying for a baby, before I got pregnant or before I knew I was pregnant, I bought Abe and I a gift with a prayer from the Quran on it called Ayat al-Kursi, and it's the protection prayer. And that was my gift for Ramadan for Eid. And Marina was like, they buried her with that prayer. Like, you could put any prayer in the Quran. It's like, just crazy. Like, all the things that started coming together, we all started sitting down and talking. And they put that prayer on her headstone. That's the one that they chose. And Abe and I just got so mad. We got so mad. She's like, how dare you? You know, you prayed for that, so we're here to getting it to you. Now you're just gonna leave us 2 months beforehand? Like we did this for you. You know, that's what we said. But now I know, like, no, she did that for us. Like so that I would experience this. Because she probably saw something in us that we were gonna be good parents and she didn't want us to miss out on this before she left. And Raina told us that before she passed away that she was having dreams. And in her dreams, like she would have people telling her like come to Jenna, but it wasn't. She thought it was like someone in the family is gonna pass away, but Raina never told anyone, and the mom didn't. So yeah, her mom was worried that someone else was gonna pass away, but it ended up being her. So and just like on the drive when we're leaving April, she's like, if I don't come back, like I need you guys. Like, and we're like, what are you talking about? Like, you're gonna come back. Like she would always just say that, you know, if I don't come back from Hajj. But she just died pure. I'm like, there's no better way. Like, selfishly, we wanted her here from Madi, but that was like, she wouldn't have wanted it any other way. In fact, she always wanted to be buried in Lebanon because that's where she was from. So if she would have passed away here, we would have had to ship her body there and bury her there anyways. So, and I guess the sister said when they pulled her out and they were washing her body, that she had her one finger up like this. And when you pray and when you die, you're supposed to say La ilaha illallah. That's what you're supposed to say. And her fingers up like this. So she's like, yeah, I bet you she was saying that when she was passing away. And I don't mean to be rude, but I have to say this, like, I only knew the woman for 4 years. And I can't tell you there's been no human being on this planet that has affected my soul like as much as her. I just felt like she was my mom, and she's the one who wanted me to be a mom. She believed it. And now I'm like, I lost her. She was like the one I looked up to because she raised 7 children and not like she took them from a war. She brought them here with nothing. They were living in a basement. They had no home. And she raised them all. One sister lives in Dubai, one in France. Like, they're all amazing human beings. And she stayed home with them every single day. And she said she would have more kids if she physically could. Like, she was saying that. She's like, I had 7. And I was, now I have Maddie. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did this woman have 7 kids? Like, it's insane. But she was my matriarch. She was my mom. And she, when I got to hug her the last time, which was when I saw her in April on the driveway, because I was married and having her son's child, she's like, now listen to me. You are my daughter, you know? And I was like, well, I kind of always was like, I always felt like it, you know? Like she didn't make it difficult for me at all. So, yeah, I was just like, how could you do this like 2 months, you know? And Abe was so upset because he's like, she's supposed to meet Monty, like, this is hers and this is her gift. And it's just really hard to hold grief. And you know, because you work in the industry, it's so hard to hold grief and birth and like death and birth in the same hand, you know, because you want to be happy, but at the same time, like this is this huge void. And you think about her every time I look at him now, I think of her because I truly believe in my soul, like he's here because of her, because she prayed for him. She prayed for him at Hajj, like she prayed for him at Mecca. Like it was insane, and it was a boy, and we go through the stages, and it comes up, and it's just nuts. We had to actually call like the embassy to like we had to come home early because of the war, and it was just weird because none of us cared. We just wanted to stay there with her, you
Mhm.
know. And when the dad was with her for like 50 years, you know, like it was like such a huge loss. Like they were with each other since they were kids. And when he was praying to her and we gathered around her tombstone and he pressed his lips, like this huge red dragonfly just landed on his back. And she had beautiful red hair. She wore the hijab, so only you'd see it if you were family and in the house. But we were just like, there she is. You know,
Mhm.
she's like, you just feel her. I still feel her every day, even with Madi. Like, he's her. And I told you this earlier, but he was born, Abe has a birthmark on his hand and it's red and it turns blue and it gets cold. But Madi, when he was born, he's got a little red birthmark on his eyelid. And they're like, you know what that means, right? Like, he was kissed by an angel before he came here. And I'm like, okay. She named him, you know, she named him. She made him, she prayed for him, and he's here, like, healthy and safe. I just want her to be here and share it with me, you know?
I'm sorry, my love. I'm sorry you had to hold both those polarities so close to each other, the birth and the death.
Yeah. It's so funny because Alpha Darla, even when she was there and standing around her grave every day, and in Islam, it's beautiful. These people grieve for like, well, I do now too, for like 3 days. Like, and the whole town comes to the house. Like, that's how it is. And it
Mhm.
forces you, it's not like this 1 day thing and it's off back to your life. Everyone, we're there for a week and it's like a week long forceful grieving process. Like you wear black every single day, you pray every single day. The sheikh comes to, at the time they came to the driveway and he sits around and we all sit in chairs and it was like 100 people there. And I looked at Abe, I'm like, hey, is this like people from the town or like, is it your family? He's like, this is my family. So that's how many people exist in Lebanon. I'm like, what? This is huge. It's very overwhelming, but the sheikh would give a sermon and sing because of the Quran, you sing it, right? You don't speak it, you sing the Quran. Like, and what they do is they put a big speaker on the driveway so the whole town can hear it. Like it's loud, and so they know someone passed. And then someone reads the Quran over her for 72 hours. Like they take shifts. And she was the where she's buried, the mosque is right there, and she hears the call to prayer 5 times a day. Like there couldn't be anything more perfect for her in general, you know? So a part of me is like so happy for her, but so sad for us, you know?
Of course.
Yeah. So we have her picture up in the kitchen and it's huge. And we got it in Lebanon from an uncle who owns a photography business. And we just keep her in the kitchen because that's where she'd always want us to be. And it's interesting because, you know, when you have a baby, um, the sisters come, the mom would usually come because we had the room all, we renovated our house. We had the room all ready for her to come because she comes whenever anyone has a baby, she comes for 2 weeks. And that's what they do. And the
Mhm.
women gather around to help the woman, right? And
That's
I'm out
right.
here by myself. So his sister Raina came with her daughter, I think 3 weeks after I had Madi. And she came in, she's the picture because we all have the same picture in her house. She's like, "Hi, mom." She's like, I'm here doing what you're supposed to be doing." You know, like it's just insane. We just miss her a lot.
Of course.
So
Mm. Yeah.
my work couldn't believe it. My boss was like, and interestingly enough, it's after we went to Lebanon and we flew home in like an emergency situation because we had to get out of there because they
Right.
started canceling all the flights because of the bombs. And I couldn't believe I was putting him through that either because he was hearing it all. Like my dress was flying up, it was cracking windows. It just was, you know, people thought I was crazy for doing it, but couldn't. I'm so glad I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Yeah.
And when we came home to Niagara just to help the dad acclimatize to his house again. So we were there for about a week, and while I was there, my boss calls me. She's like, Darla, I know this is wildly inappropriate because I know she was advocating in my end. She knew I was in Lebanon. And she's like, you got your promotion. You got hired. You got the position. Because I had interviewed before I left. And then I just left them high and dry. I called her. I'm like, I'm leaving. I don't know when I'm going to be back. But she gave me the promotion. So I'm like, oh. And the sisters were like, yeah, Darla, it's because you're doing good. Because the family couldn't believe that I came there. You know, they couldn't believe I did that when 7 months pregnant. But I wouldn't have it anyway. Like, that's how much I love. Like, if I love, I love. And that's the most feminine thing about me, I think.
Yeah.
Like, I would give anyone anything, you know, if I love you, you're gonna know it. And I just trusted. I trusted that God was gonna take care of it, and I wasn't gonna lose Maddie there, and I was gonna get home okay. It was like this weird kind of knowing, and everyone was doting on me. You know, they're like, "Darla, don't go over there, you're gonna fall, and don't sit on that chair." And it was just like such an amazing feeling to be allowed to be taken care of, because that's not me, right? It's just not.